friends, it's Chloe here. Now, guessing by the title of this video, you know what is in store. Today we are making a very easy, beginner-friendly, no-knead bread. Now, following in the footsteps of the many people who started baking bread during quarantine, I decided, you know what, it's about time to try. I'll be maybe 9 months late to the trend. And now that I've stepped into the world of baking bread, I can proudly say, I'm not going back. This no-knead bread recipe is an amazing beginner recipe. It only requires 5 ingredients, you don't have to knead the bread, and it's essentially foolproof. How do I know it's foolproof, you ask? Well, because I've made this bread every day this week and it hasn't failed me. It's literally worked for me every single time, even though I've been tweaking the time, the temperature, the technique. Now, this recipe is an amalgamation of the many recipes that I looked up on the internet, and I found some really good videos with good techniques and tips for beginners, and I'll link those in the description box below. So let's get to it. Okay, so first thing I'm gonna do is measure out my flour. I am going to be using all-purpose flour, but if you have bread flour, that's great. The difference is in their gluten content, but I've been working with all-purpose flour for the past week and it's been working perfectly for me. So I'm going to be using 400 grams of flour. Ideally, you want to measure it with a scale for precision. If you don't, this is equivalent to about 2 cups and 3/4. Okay, so now let's talk about yeast. I have instant yeast here and I have active dry yeast here. The major difference between the two is actually in their moisture content, where the active dry needs to be proofed first before it can be used, whereas the instant can be used instantly. In addition to that, the instant will rise quicker compared to the active dry. That being said, for the purposes of this recipe, I have found no differences between the two, and for proof of concept, I am going to use both and see if there's any differences. To proof my yeast, I'm just going to start with a measuring cup, add 300 milliliters of water. Now I'm adding 2 teaspoons of sugar. I'm going to microwave this for 30 seconds. We added the sugar to act as some food for our yeast. Now I'm adding 3/4 teaspoon of active dry yeast to my mixture. Give this a quick mix. Now I'm going to find somewhere warm for this to stand for 10 minutes. Now I'm going to add some salt. I don't like my bread being too salty because I do butter it afterwards, so I'm going to use 2 teaspoons. So this is about 5 minutes into our active dry yeast blooming. You can see that there's a huge cloud right here. You can wait a little bit longer at this point, but I'm going to go ahead and add it right in. So whenever you're adding your wet ingredients to your dry ingredients, you want to create a little well like this. This one is my active dry one, and I'm just going to add it to the middle. Now with your weapon of choice, just give this a good mix. After adding your water, you want to mix until the flour is just incorporated. The dough will look a little bit shaggy, but it'll be okay. So I'm looking for the dough to look about like this consistency. There's no more flour stuck at the bottom and everything's incorporated. If we're using instant yeast, now we just add 3/4 teaspoons straight to the flour. You want to make sure that you pour your salt as far away from the yeast as possible. You don't want them to be in direct contact as it can inhibit its growth. You can just add your sugar in here too. Likewise, for our instant yeast, we're going to use 300 milliliters of lukewarm water and add it to the center and mix. Likewise, you want to mix just until everything incorporates. Okay, so now our dough is mixed, and I know I mentioned that this recipe was going to be really easy, but here comes the really, really hard part, the waiting. This bread will require 2 proofs, and I've tried this recipe many times using different time points. I do think that it needs at least a minimum of 4 to 5 hours for the first proof, and then there will be a second proof. It can go up to 18 to 24 hours. That has worked as well. I like to make this right before I go to bed so that most of the waiting is actually done while I'm sleeping. So now all I'm going to do is put cling film on top and then also put a towel on top to keep it snug. The cling film and towel will make sure that it doesn't dry out. Now I'm going to put my bread in a nice warm place in my house. For me, this is my microwave, but if you're going to put anything in your microwave, be sure to tell your household as well so they know not to turn it on. And I'm also adding a cup of hot water to sit in there alongside it. Now, we let it sleep. And we're back. It's been about 13 hours. Man, I slept really well last night. So let's have a look at how much our dough has risen. I have 2 batches here, the instant and active dry. As you can see, both of them more than doubled in size overnight. On top of that, if you sniff it, there is a mild fermented yeasty smell, so don't be alarmed. But now we're going to roll out our dough for the second proof. For the next step, we're going to generously flour our work surface.
Then you want to scrape the sides of the bowl. You can see that it's sticking, but there's some spidery webs here. You want to scrape it onto the floured surface. It'll deflate a little, but that's okay. Now sprinkle some flour on top. Flour is your friend here. This dough is really easy to work with right now. The longer you wait, the easier it is to work with. However, even if you wait only 5 to 6 hours, it's a little bit stickier to the touch, but it's still doable. Now I just want to reinforce the dough by folding it. Fold it up like a letter. Fold it this way as well. Now create a nice little ball shape by tucking in and pinching underneath. Put it down, shape it into a ball, and we're ready to go.
Okay, now you want to take a piece of plastic wrap. Generously flour the inside of the surface so it doesn't stick. And then plop the dough right in. Sprinkle a little bit of flour on top. Cover with the cling film that you used before, as well as keep it snug with a towel on top. Now we're gonna let this rest for about 2 hours. Time for a siesta. All right, so it's been about 1 hour since we started our second proof, and now it's time to preheat the oven. I'm going to be preheating my oven to the highest possible setting that it has, which is about 500 degrees Fahrenheit, I think. And this is just to get the oven super hot and ready for our bread. So now let's talk about some baking options. If you have a Dutch oven, now would be the perfect time to whip it out and to preheat your oven with the Dutch oven inside. So the beauty of a Dutch oven is that while it's baking its bread, it's generating a lot of steam, which helps with the rise of the bread. That being said, not everyone has a Dutch oven, and that is completely fine. In order to mimic this effect, there are 2 amazing alternatives that I've tried out. The first alternative is to use a cast iron pan. This will be able to generate a really good crust. And in addition to that, what I usually do is I fill like a cake pan with some water in order to generate that steam. Another alternative that you can use to mimic that effect of a Dutch oven and creating steam is to use a roasting pan like this alongside a cookie sheet just to create that seal. So whichever method you choose, whether you use a Dutch oven or a cast iron pan with a pan full of water or a roasting pan with a sheet pan on top, all of those options will work. Just make sure that when you're preheating the oven, have these ready to go and put them inside to get them hot. Okay, so it's been about 2 hours since our second proof, and I have my very, very hot cast iron pan that I've been preheating with the oven. Now it's time to work a little bit quickly. This is my bread, which has been proofing for about 2 hours. I'm going to quickly sprinkle some flour into my cast iron pan. I'm going to carefully peel off my bread. It is a little bit sticky. I have it here. I'm going to gently place it inside of my pan. At this point, I'm going to brush a little bit of butter on it because I want to stick some sesame seeds on it. Now I'm going to sprinkle some sesame seeds. Finally, I'm going to cut into the bread with a pair of scissors to create some vents for the bread to release gases. And I just use scissors. The bread is going into the oven at this point. There is a pan of water there to help generate steam. And now I'm going to let it bake for 40 minutes on 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Alright, so I just took the bread out of the oven. It's been about 40 minutes. Just a tip to know whether your bread is completely baked. What you want to do is you want to lift it up and just tap the bottom. And if it sounds hollow, that means your bread's done cooking. I'm going to let this cool maybe 30 minutes. Depending on how patient I am, and then we'll cut into it. Alright, so for our second option, if you don't have a Dutch oven or you don't have a cast iron pan, what you can do is I've been preheating this roasting pan with a sheet pan on it, and it's really hot. Great thing about this is that there's no fuss. All you have to do is take out the parchment paper and put it straight in. As we did before, I'm just going to brush it with some butter, sesame seeds, and vent it. So I'm going to put it in the oven now. Okay, so it's been about 40 minutes now. I have our bread baking in the makeshift Dutch oven. Now I'm just going to lift up the top cover. Ooh. Now I'm going to let it bake for another 5 minutes or until I get the coloration that I like. And here's the bread that we made in our makeshift Dutch oven. As you can hear, it is super crunchy and it bounces back. As you can see, there is not really any difference in using the Dutch
Dutch oven method or using the cast iron method, so both work equally well.
All right, so our bread is cooled and I'm ready to cut into this. It smells so good. First of all, let's hear a little bit of a crunch. I don't know if you can hear it. Let's just cut right along the seams. Ooh, oh, ice cream. Okay, so I'm not a professional bread cutter, but let's have a look on the inside. So there's a nice crumb. There's quite a number of air pockets. It's not quite artisan type bread, but it smells amazing and it looks amazing. And I know it tastes amazing. And it's really fluffy on the inside, really spongy. If you're a fan of crustier bread, you can bake it for a little bit longer. I like it to be a little bit softer. So I'm gonna take a little piece and put some butter and give it a try. Nothing beats fresh bread. Oh, it's so good. And this took no time at all to do. Anyways, whether or not you use active dry yeast, instant yeast, if you let it rise overnight or for longer than that, this bread is very beginner friendly, very forgiving, and I definitely recommend you to try. Every loaf is gonna be a little bit different. They're like a snowflake, but they always taste lovely, and there's lots of room for variety. You can have sesame seeds, chia seeds, anything like that, and you can make this into sandwich bread or toasted garlic bread. That's what I've done as well. So super versatile, super easy, hands off, and I definitely recommend for you to try. All right, if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a like, leave a comment below, and subscribe. Thanks.